Ready for my spin? That right there is a $150,000 Mercedes G-Wagon we paid $58,000 for, and here's why you should too. Maybe. People buy G-Wagons for one reason, in my opinion, and that is, of course, prestige. This is a luxury item. It's like a really expensive purse or an extremely nice watch. Not my Swatch Moon Swatch here, but like an actually nice watch. It tells the world you have made it. In my opinion, that's a pretty dumb reason to buy anything, especially a G-Wagon. No, the reason you want to buy a G-Wagon is because it is the most badass ultimate off-roader out there. And for $58,000 on the used market, let me prove a point. Let's not compare this 8-year-old Mercedes to other 8-year-old SUVs. Let's compare this $58,000 used Mercedes to other $58,000 new off-roaders. $58,000 doesn't go very far in 2024 when it comes to new off-roaders. Sure, you could buy a new Jeep Wrangler or a new 4Runner or a new Bronco, but any of the really high-end versions are going to be well over $60,000. This is the crazy world we live in, so $58K is kind of just run-of-the-mill. Now the Ford or the Jeep or the Toyota won't have a 563 horsepower twin-turbo V8. This thing is nuts. It also likely, maybe not always, but likely won't have 3 locking diffs with a full-time permanent 4-wheel drive system or a 7-speed automatic I mean, the list goes on and on of the things the G-Wagon has even 8 years later that a new 4-wheel drive might not have. Let's talk elephant in the room, and that is, of course, reliability. Now, there was a period where Mercedes was building vehicles to last a million years and a million miles. I'm talking the 1980s. Think like the W123 and the W126, a car that I own personally. Basic inline 5-cylinder diesels that would never break. And then through the 90s, things were looking pretty good into the late 90s. And then Mercedes realized people aren't buying our cars because they never break and they never replace them. So things started going downhill pretty quickly. And if you recall, like the mid-2000s was kind of the low point. Some of the C and the E classes were very problematic. Now, I think they're getting better, but 2016 was kind of still that tail end of Mercedes quality problems, except for the G-Wagon, because the G-Wagon was a new vehicle in 2016, but it was based on a very, very, very old vehicle that still retained that Mercedes-Benz quality. The problem is, being an old school Mercedes, it does have that everlasting feel, but this is a vehicle still sold new in 2016, which means that it has to have airbags and ABS and traction control and a screen and all this stuff. And what you end up with is a vehicle designed in the 1970s for the Shah of Iran, but packed with a twin-turbo V8 and stability control and 1,000 miles of wiring harness. So from what I've talked to several mechanics about, G-Wagons are especially hard to fix when they go wrong, because everything is just so crammed into this body. Shockingly though, this generation of G-Wagon is known to be fairly reliable. After talking to our German specialist, common issues include the twin turbo setup and in some cases the 7G automatic transmission, but for the most part, they last a really long time. They're really good. Much like today's video sponsor, O'Sullivan Law, Scott is a great friend of the channel, and if you have any legal issues, be sure to call Scott first. He's the official sponsor of our TFL G-Wagon series. Now let's talk our G-Wagon. 2016 G63, originally in matte black that we've had wrapped as cool dark red. We bought it with 88,000 miles, and now it's 89,000 miles on it, and I'm happy to report it's only had 3 check engine lights in the past 2 weeks. Okay, that is true, but it's been for one niggling problem. I assume maybe a problem the previous owner had, and that was a thermostat that went bad. Not a big deal, right? Except, I'm contradicting myself here a little bit, it was a very expensive fix because it's a Mercedes part and the thermostat lives pretty deep in the engine instead of on top like every other thermostat. So it was an $1,100 fix all in to replace the thermostat, which is pretty expensive. Now, what else is wrong or going to go wrong with our G-Wagon? Well, obviously I don't know what's going to go wrong, but this is actually a really sorted car, 90,000 miles. All the buttons, all the switches, all the knobs work, the Bluetooth audio works, there's a little bit of a dead pixel on the screen, not too big of a deal, but the heated seats, the heated steering wheel, it's all really very, very good. It's a fine machine. Sure, it's got some alignment problems, the steering wheel's a little crooked, and maybe some of the suspension could use a little bit of a refreshing, but overall, it's such a good car. It doesn't feel like a car with 90,000 miles, and we didn't particularly buy this car super well. We just bought it off a typical used car lot, really no service history, pretty good Carfax, but like it's not necessarily been babied. It's just proof that these cars can be really good. The funny thing about G-Wagons is we think of them as pretty large and imposing vehicles because they're so boxy and squared and angular. But the reality is they're not that big. This vehicle is a full 10 inches shorter than a new full-size four-door Bronco. That's not the crazy number though. G-Wagons, because it's a vehicle designed in the 70s, are super, super, super narrow. We're talking nearly half a foot narrower than a Ford Bronco, which isn't a particularly wide vehicle. And you really feel how narrow the G-Wagon is when you get inside and sit next to somebody, because you are super cozy to the person in the passenger seat when you're driving. There's just not a lot of shoulder width. In fact, I can almost reach the B-pillar without leaning over. That's how narrow these cars are. It also means that the center console is really narrow, which also means there was no place to put a cup holder. So the solution was the basketball net cup holder, which is absurdly deep and means that any drink in there is just going to vanish into Shaquille O'Neal oblivion, because it does look like a hoop, and I'm learning about basketball. Some other things in here which are fantastic. Material quality is really good, specifically these seats. It may have 80-some thousand miles, but this quilted stitched leather has held up really well, and I love how they even put it there on the door, which gives it a super premium feel, which you're just not going to get in a 4Runner, folks. This thing is luxury. You've got stitched leather across the dash. You got the carbon fiber across the middle here. It really feels like a top-notch $150,000 experience, even in 2024. What doesn't feel so good is maybe some of the technology. So we have this integrated screen. I think it's like a 7-inch screen. It's looking real small, and more frustrating than that, it is not a touch screen. So you can listen to your Sabrina Carpenter through Bluetooth audio, which is really good, I should say, but it's tough to navigate. We do have physical buttons, but this is not really what I mean when I say want physical buttons to do like a little PQRS ABC touchpad. It's good for presets, and that's about it. And then some more physical buttons over here. It does have dual zone automatic climate control. It does have heated and ventilated seats. So really, it's got a lot of tech, including adaptive cruise control and steering wheel buttons and a little sunroof. That's all good. But from a screen standpoint, this is going to be worse than a Wrangler or a Bronco or a Defender or anything new today. Nothing really drives like the Mercedes G-Wagon, except for one vehicle, strangely, and that's the Jeep Wrangler 392. And they both drive a little bit agricultural with way too much horsepower. This thing is nuts. What I mean by that is solid axle front and back. It's sprung very firmly, and anytime one wheel hits a bump, the other wheel responds, especially high speeds over like expansion joints. It feels like an old school Jeep Wrangler. But it has 563 horsepower. When you put your foot into it, it just takes off. This is a classic example of having way too much power for the chassis, but I adore it. This V8 engine, this 5.5 liter bi-turbo V8, is almost 1960s American old school. It's lumpy and lazy. It makes its peak torque at 1,750 RPM. So you can accelerate really quickly and never get below like 5th or 6th gear. That's how much torque there is. And then when you really mad it, the turbos wake up and it just launches. But it's such a beautiful baritone low-end engine in a platform that can't handle it. Oh, it is just so much fun. It drives way cooler than any Bronco, way cooler than any 4Runner. And like I said, a 392 Wrangler is about as close as you get, except this has got more leather. So that's pretty cool. So is the G-Wagon the smart purchase? Absolutely not, but smart people buy 4Runners. Interesting people buy G-Wagons, and that's why you want one, because there is nothing more interesting than a used G-Wagon. And with new ones getting more and more expensive, this is the car you want if you're a little crazy and weird like me.